Hey guys, welcome to episode 5 of Yankaroos BFC. We have a very special episode today. Stefan is in the house, and he's a friend of the show, very early supporter, PSG fan, all-around expert on the French league, if you could say that, but long-time supporter and fan of French football. And since Dan is away, we thought maybe we'd have you along.
Cool. Thanks for having me, Jenny.
Yeah, of course.
Pleasure.
Cool. How did you get into PSG?
So to be honest, I started as a kid, really getting into football when France won the World Cup 1998. Which is obviously was a big event in the country and lots of excitement. And since I come from a region close to Germany, I was an early supporter of my local club, which is FCMS, which I still support, and they're currently in the second league. They're doing pretty well. They're on the roll actually right now. But I started getting really interested in PSG when they got acquired by the Qatari, which is something that many people would hate me for saying. But the reasoning behind it was that French people always had this, this disappointment on the European stage, not having a club capable of winning the Champions League or winning the Europa League and really doing well on the European stage. And when PSG got acquired by the Qatari, there was lots of excitement in the country about whether it would be able to, as a French team, to win the Champions League. I got really interested in them.
Why is that French teams have historically not done so well in European competition?
That's a good question. I guess it has to do maybe with the weakness of the league compared to the other leagues in the top 5 in Europe. Although this argumentation also has its limits, because if you consider leagues like Scotland or Belgium, they had also their fair share of success in the 80s or even before. So it's a bit hard to say, really. I think right now it is certainly the weakest of the 5 leagues in the top 5, but it's also surely increasing in value, steadily increasing in value with lots of investors coming in and also an increased interest from the general public.
Is there something like the 50+1 rule in France? So for example, in Germany, there's like this 50+1 rule where 51% of the club has to be owned by the fans or like members of the club. Is there anything like that to prevent complete corporate ownership of a club?
No, that's currently not so true, and that's actually what allowed the Qatari to acquire PSG. Also, recently you had the example of Monaco being acquired by a Russian billionaire. Who really put lots of money in the team and then tried to also emulate what Dortmund is doing in Germany. And you have also recently McCourt, which is an American businessman, who acquired the major ownership in Olympique de Marseille. Mm-hmm. So that's actually possible. And I think it is a competitive advantage of the French league in that respect compared to Germany, for instance. So we see a large influx of capital, and that helps also to increase the attractiveness of the league at the end.
So maybe is it? I mean, the French economy is one of the biggest in Europe, right? And so you can understand when, for example, the Portuguese league is not doing as well, just because they don't have that much sponsorship dollars. They don't have as much money. They can't get as much money out of their fans. So naturally, players are not going to get paid as much at the clubs, their local clubs. Or even in the big cities, and so naturally they move abroad. But that's not the case with France. France is a relatively wealthy country, very long tradition of football of football support and fandom. I just wonder why the greats have had to go abroad and weren't able to flourish at these particular clubs.
So if you look, for instance, at the World Cup 1998, when France won the competition, you had, from memory, about 20 players from the squad that were not playing in France. You had Robert Pires for the FCMS back then, you had Guy Varche, I think was in Auxerre, and you had a few more playing in the French league. But definitely there was a lack of capital in order to really to pay the players what they were expecting to be paid abroad. I mean, back then Italy was still pretty big, and obviously the Premier League in Spain. But also there was also this understanding that in order to grow as a player, you had to go abroad, you had to go to play in Premier League. To play.
But I guess my question is more why? Like why couldn't the clubs pay as much? Is it because like fans weren't willing to pay for tickets, or like in the domestic market that like it was more difficult to get sponsorship deals, or like what was the background, the economic background of that made it more difficult for French clubs to compete and retain that talent and then go on and fight for European success?
No, Jay, that's a good question. I'm not sure there is a definite answer to that. One reason for sure is that there was less money in the French league. Maybe not due to selling tickets to the games, but you're talking about jersey sponsorship. You're talking about the TV rights for the league. Those were definitely much lower in the past. Yeah. And we've seen recently an increase in those. For instance, TV rights have been recently renegotiated, and I think they've passed the billion mark recently. So that's definitely making it the second most lucrative league in terms of TV rights in the world. And also, with clubs like PSG investing a lot, they're able also to attract a lot of sponsorship. They're able to negotiate a new deal with the kit manufacturer. They're able to negotiate better deals with the main jersey sponsor. So, for instance, the Emirates deal now that runs with PSG since 2006 is currently being not really negotiated, but they will get out of the deal, I think, at the end of this season, or maybe the next. And they're looking really to score a big deal with maybe even a company or a sponsor from Asia worth 70-80 million a season. They're looking at figures close to what MU is getting from Chevrolet right now.
Oh, wow.
So really big money is coming into the league right now.
Something happened like in the early 2000s, in like the early to mid 2000s, where just interest in football just exploded, and European soccer just exploded. And that's, for example, the rivalry between Manchester United and Arsenal in like the early 2000s. And like there's just a story, there was a narrative, and also like personal animosity with real like just really combative players like Roy Keane and Patrick Vieira, and they always had, you always looked forward to that matchup because it was like two titans going at it. And I think there's also like these really big derbies, like for example, the Classico everybody watches, Dortmund, Bayern everybody watches. And I wonder if there's like some sort of analog, so what's a story like, because also, one thing that's the elephant in the room is that you have like maybe 3 or 4 big teams in the French league. But really only 2 teams that are going to like challenge for the title. So you have PSG, Monaco, Marseille, and Lyon, and then there's a long tail of smaller teams. But when Monaco has won, it's been very rare, even though they're one of the better organized and teams with more resources. And PSG just has the most resources of any of the teams.
Yeah, I mean the league reminds me a little bit of Bundesliga right now. You have really one top team, PSG, a bit akin to Bayern München, except that they don't have that history and track record of winning the league yet, at least. And you have those challenges. You have Monaco, who's trying to emulate Borussia Dortmund. Then you have the Schalkes and Leverkusen of France. Maybe it could be Marseille, Lyon. And then this long tail that you talk, a little bit like in Germany. But there's definitely less experience on the European stage of winning big games, of really believing you can go far in a competition, even winning it. As a matter of fact, there's only one French win in European Cups, and that's Marseille in 1993 against AC Milan.
Was that the European Cup, or was that
the Champions League? Actually, the first edition of the new Champions League format.
Cool.
And then you had a couple of good performances by, there's also PSG that won the Defend Cup Winners' Cup '95.
Okay.
It doesn't exist anymore. But otherwise, you have some performances of Monaco being in the Champions League final or semi-final, Marseille last year in the Europa League final. But still, obviously, it's lacking a track record in the league.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the Bundesliga, I think Bayern have won the Champions League 4 or 5 times.
Yeah.
So even though there's that power law and Bayern's dominance in the Bundesliga is pretty much complete, they still have been able to kick on and use their regular league performances as a springboard for being competitive in the Champions League, which is something that PSG has not been able to accomplish
That
so far.
brings really the question of the national, I guess, competitivity of the league. I mean, as a team, PSG being a team willing to win the Champions League at some point, they keep saying it every season. Actually, this season they didn't say it because they've been a bit more careful. But otherwise, they keep saying it. But they have not been challenged that much on the national stage as of late. It was Monaco winning 2 years ago. They had a great team with Kylian Mbappe, with Falcao, with all those guys. Fabinho, Lamar, Benjamin Mendy, all of those guys actually part of the French squad.
Yeah.
They want to work up this season. So maybe a bit of a free season
yeah.
for Monaco. They sold all of their players at the end. But otherwise, they need really some top challenges like Dortmund will be challenging Bayern and being actually a component, a contestant able to win.
But to be fair, like PSG Monaco is 2 games per year. No, actually maybe 3 if they play each other in Coupe de France. But normally they don't come up against each other like until maybe the very late stages, if at all. So like 4 games out of the year like does not prepare you adequately for a successful Champions League final or a Champions League campaign. And so, like, I wonder if there's also a question of mentality where, for example, PSG Barcelona last year, where PSG I think it had beat Barcelona by 5 goals to 1. And then, in the return leg, just capitulated, just crazy capitulation. Do you think there's something in the mentality that, like, they almost don't believe they belong there, or they're almost shocked to think that they're playing well and then they get in their own heads? Because Real Madrid, like sometimes they really underperform, but somehow they still get those wins. I would say they didn't play particularly well in the past 2 or 3 Champions League finals, but they still had the mentality to see it through to the end.
Yeah, so that's a question that keeps on coming back in the French media. In L'Equipe, in SoFoot, if you read those magazines, you'll see every time they lose a major game. Was the case yesterday against Liverpool. Comes up the question whether they have that mentality, they have that mental strength to really make it on the big games. Right? It's not about winning against Rosenborg or Copenhagen. It's about really winning against Liverpool, against Barcelona, those type of teams. And the answer is it's not that easy. I mean, you'd say maybe they don't, but they do have the players that are also used to playing those big games. All the players in the top squad play also with national teams. Many of them play the World Cup. Now you can say, of course, Thiago Silva had also an experience of many traumas actually in his career. I mean, you think about the World Cup 14, the loss against Germany 7-1. He has been also pointed out as being not mentally strong enough. And then the loss against Barcelona 6-1 in the last 5 minutes of the game, getting 3 goals. So you definitely wonder if that's the case. And there's no clear answer to that. They should be mentally prepared. Yeah. The only reason why they wouldn't be is that they don't get the chance often enough during the regular season to play against top teams. I mean, they have decent teams, but they don't play obviously like a Premier League team would.
I mean, it could also be a question of youth, right? So, for example, they have a lot of talent. Like, for example, in the starting lineup yesterday, there was Adrien Rabiot, there was Mbappe, and like these are very talented players. I was really impressed by Rabiot, but these are players who like haven't figured out how to win a Champions League final before. The only one in the entire squad who's won a Champions League final is Neymar. Right, and Dani Alves.
I guess Di Maria as well. He must have been part of the.
I don't know for sure.
Squad.
It could be.
Yeah.
But like, I think what really helps is to have a Ramos-like figure who's just like, hey, keep your heads about you. We're gonna get this done. And it seems like when everybody's kind of panicking and like thinking for themselves and like and forgetting about the team cohesiveness, like these are the big players that bring everything together and say like, hey, don't panic. Like we've got this. And maybe that's what PSG have been lacking a bit. So maybe the right
That's
thing
what
to
they
do.
tried to address actually when they recruited Dani Alves. Obviously, this season.
Is he a leader, you think?
He's seen as a leader, I think, within the team. He's seen as somebody who has the experience of the big games. For instance,
But also in terms of personality, like before the game, is he the one who stands up and like gives a team talk?
I think I've seen him on some occasions, really trying to speak up and being a leader in the changing room. For sure, Gigi Buffon is one of them. I mean, he has been actually traveling with the squad to Liverpool, although he was suspended. He's suspended 3 games now.
Right, because the final last year.
Exactly. So I think, you get those players now. Maybe they're not enough such players. But at the end, if you look at other successful teams, and you look at the squad of Liverpool, how many of them won the Champions League? Not that many, I guess. We need to check the stats, but not that many for sure.
That's true.
So I don't think it's only that. I think it might be past experiences, it might be some sort of mental threshold that you need to surpass. I mean, also when players come to play for PSG, they know it's a team that has not won the Champions League. Maybe has a little only little experience on the European scene still. And French league is also not seen as maybe the typical competitor for Champions League final win. So I think that might play also in the back of their minds a little bit.
Mm-hmm. So let's shift gears a little bit. How do you feel being a fan of a team that has benefited so much from investment, from just blatantly going out in the market, buying the best players, and being owned by like a Qatari investment fund? Like what are the thoughts of a fan? Because obviously you have a very strong connection to France. You've been a football fan for a long time. For you, it's obviously positive because now French team and the French league can finally see some success on the European stage, perhaps. But I mean, like, what about the soul of a team? Like, what do you think about that?
Yeah. So first point, I was looking at stats recently, and I saw that if you look at 5 last seasons, the team that spent the most on purchasing players is actually not PSG or Manchester City or you name it.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually Manchester United.
That's right.
And I think usually they're not seen as a team that is buying their way into success. And actually, they've not been that successful in that respect.
Exactly.
So
we discussed that recently.
PSG, I think, is number 2. So obviously, they spend close to €1 billion in transfer fee. The big Neymar and Mbappe transfer being a shocking transfer as of late last season. Now, obviously, people, especially in Germany, argue, about. You can't buy your success. You have to keep on the soul of the team. And PSG, in that respect, are trying to buy the success. I mean, you have to accept it. They're trying to be the great team, great squad. They know they need to purchase players to go there. They also have a great youth academy. I mean, you see Rabiot is coming out of it. Many more. I mean, Areola is also from the academy. You have many more coming now into the team.
Yeah.
Team Weah, for instance, also was formed.
Yassine Adli as well.
Yeah.
Up and coming
So
player.
quite a few.
Yeah.
And obviously all of that takes time. Now, PSG, the PSG project is interesting from my perspective, from a sports perspective for sure, but also from a business perspective. I think it's interesting to see them as a case study of building a brand, a globally recognized brand, deals with partners, establishing the brands in new markets. And you can actually see this working pretty well. I mean, if you look at Asia, you see the number of fans they're able to get in there. Even just go through the streets in Germany. Actually, I'm surprised when I see that many youngsters wearing PSG kits or PSG sportswear. So it's actually interesting from that perspective too. And I guess I might not have the typical view of a football fan because I'm looking at various aspects, but I like what you're trying to achieve.
You mentioned something about PSG as a brand. What would you say PSG stands for then as a brand?
I think they definitely want to attract the best players. They want to build the best team, but they also want to be seen as a team that goes beyond football. I think it's about sports as such. I mean, you look at the recent partnership they just closed with Jordan Brand, which is typically a basketball brand for quite some money, which is actually good from the financial fair play perspective. And you might think at first sight, what would they strike a deal with a basketball brand? But I think it goes well into their strategy of being just seen as a cool brand, maybe also covering elements of streetwear even. Something that goes beyond football, that goes even beyond sports. And you might hate it, you might love it, but the truth is it's actually quite successful. It's been quite successful really in the past years. So from a business perspective, even if the Qatari had to invest that much money into the team, it has proven already quite lucrative to do what they did.
Do you know what the revenues are like?
I think the revenue were around $500 million as of last season, if I'm right. So it's among the top 10 in Europe. Not there, MU or Real, obviously, but still really climbing the ladder every season.
Okay. And so you see Paris Saint-Germain as more of an aspirational brand that connects beyond just football. So not really a purist football brand or a purist football team, but more as something that a lot of aspirational people throughout society or throughout Europe or throughout the world can connect with. Just like, hey, sure, we have a lot of money, we spend a lot of money, but we also have a lot of success and we don't apologize for it. Does that capture it well?
I think to be sure, I mean, they are a football brand. It's a football club, and the essence of PSG is football, is winning titles, European titles if possible. But there's certainly, I mean, you see it. It's a global trend in sportswear, a global trend in clothing industry that people are wearing more and more jerseys, kits. It's also the case in the NBA, for instance. And they very well understood that in order to be successful in this area, you have to attract the best players. And I think from that perspective, attracting Neymar, and especially there was a bet back about a year ago when they attracted Mbappé. I think that's actually turned out pretty well after the World Cup. But to me, they have two of the most valuable players now in the squad, and certainly two players that will be really the future of football. I mean, the future of football now is not Messi and Ronaldo. They're going towards the end of their careers for sure. And I think it's going to be Mbappé and Neymar. So it is an investment, and I think and hopefully they'll be more successful on the European stage. And I think this question of legitimacy will also slowly disappear.
But the question then is like, where do we go from here? If we're already in a market where Neymar is worth 222 million euros, but obviously people expect growth. That's why the Qataris are investing in football, because they expect higher rates of return. And so are we only a few years away from a $1 billion player or a billion euro player?
That's hard to say. I mean, the question is whether Neymar was a freak case or whether it was just the logical continuation of the trend we saw already in the past. I mean, you saw this season Chelsea purchasing a goalkeeper for, I think, 80 million euro, which was valued at about 35 million. So there's obviously an inflation in the football market in the value of the players as teams are competing for the best players. And that is also obviously fueled by increase in TV rights in Premier League in France now also. Whether that will continue it has to be seen. I mean, obviously, if you want to fuel the increase in TV rights by the subscription, the viewers pay, then obviously at some point they won't be able to afford it.
But let's shift to this, because this is super interesting to me, because I think we're reaching the limit of what the market will bear, and I also think that there are some dynamics that are going to change. because for the past 20 years, all this growth in football financially has been financed by TV deals. And if you want to watch the Premier League, if you want to watch the Bundesliga, if you want to watch the French league or any of the top leagues, you have to subscribe to whatever TV outlet holds the rights to that league. And so that means having like a Skybox, or it means having, like BT Sport, or it means having, what have you. And those are not cheap. Like back in the US, like a cable bundle, including all these different channels, ESPN, NBC Sports, blah, 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 it costs like $120 to $130 per month. But now we find a lot of people who just, especially the younger generations, don't even have cable anymore. They only have internet, and then they do everything over YouTube, or they watch some highlights on YouTube, or they, for example, here in Germany, we have DAZN now for $10 a month. You get La Liga, you get the English Premier League, and I think you get one more. I forget what it is.
You get the Champions League also as of this season,
which is crazy for $10 a month. Yeah, I mean, compared to like whatever you would pay, even a couple of years ago. So I think we're seeing it like number one, it's a bet from these guys saying, okay, well, if we like Netflix this business model and we go for volume rather than charging each individual person an arm and a leg, and only get diehard football fans to pay ridiculous amounts, then it'll be good for our business model. But it also shows that like now you're getting people used to this $9.99 price point, and then maybe you can double that in the future. But I don't know, like you're also reaching the upper limit of how much TV viewership, how much fans will pay to actually watch this. Because there's also, I've never done this, of course, but there's also like a huge number of fans around the world who will stream these games. And so you're only monetizing a tiny percentage of the fan base. And so the question then is like, there has to be some sort of a natural cap to how much money you can extract just from viewership rights. Mm-hmm. And so where's the money going to come from in the future, Stefan? That's what I want to know.
That's a tough question, I guess. As you said, the viewership is one channel for funding the growth. As you said rightly, also by expanding the fan base, the people who purchased the 10 euro DAZN subscription, to name them, you're able to provide quite some money, obviously, in the game. Now, I guess we also saw an increase in sponsorship deals. Jersey deals, obviously, equipment providers, Nike, of the New Balance, whatever. You also, one of the channels is the sponsorship of stadiums, which has also increased quite a bit over the last years.
What is the Paris Saint-Germain stadium called?
It's actually not sponsored by a brand, it's just Parc des Princes.
Okay.
The training center is actually named after a Qatari brand.
Which is? What is it?
Ooredoo, which is it is definitely a medical center in Qatar. I don't know if it's related to medical, but they have the branding for the training center, not the stadium itself. Mm-hmm. But I think they come up with always new ideas about what aspect of the game, what aspect of the pre-game, what aspect of the everyday life of the players teams are willing to sponsor. You see those various tiers that you can really subscribe to.
Yeah.
And whether that is bringing actually the big money, I don't know. I think that's a question for a sports economics guy, I guess. But it is certainly providing some of the capital.
I think we're both business guys, right? Like this isn't our day job. We're just like passionate fans. But I think we both come from a business background, and we know that at the end of the day, the numbers have to add up. The Qataris aren't putting all this money in there just because they're wealthy and they see it as their plaything. At some place, they want a return on their investment. And so for me, if you ask me where it's probably going to come from, I would say it's geographical expansion. There are some very wealthy markets that football is not popular in yet, but it's, for example, fandom and just interest in soccer and football is just exploding in the U.S. In my lifetime, when I was a kid, people would just call us pussies for playing soccer, you know. And now it's just massive. You know, I think Ronaldo and Messi are within the top 5 most popular athletes in the United States now, along with LeBron James, and I think it's mostly basketball players. And so I think they're really banking on that, and that is why success in the Champions League is so important to PSG.
Sure. I think, I mean, one of the big, you see it in the preseason, time when teams go to Asia, they go to not so much to Africa, I must say, but definitely Asia, China. Definitely having the games there. I think the International Champions Cup, this kind of friendly competition in the preseason, has
Singapore,
also taken place. Singapore in parts. So certainly they see a potential to win over fans in those regions. Now at the same time, the PSG project is a little bit different in the sense that it is certainly economically motivated. It's a business project for sure, and I think they're successful at it. But at the same time, it's also a political project. It's about putting Qatar on the map of football on the one side, but also
but do you think that
providing some respectability for the country? I believe.
But I mean, let's be honest here. Do you think that makes people have a positive image of Qatar, that they just like come in with all their money and then all of a sudden, I don't know, just destroy the economics of, well, not destroy, maybe that's a little bit dramatic, but I don't know, just like pump all this money into the game, and you see like footballers who probably would have been making like, I don't know, like 2 or 3 million a year, all of a sudden getting paid like just like destroying the market for these players. And also just like also making football, transforming it from a working class, very local pastime, something that like, really the local fans were very passionate about. And like, for example, like my club, Arsenal, has the highest tickets in the Premier League. And I think that's also, due to the need that they needed to raise revenue. And so having a full stadium with like people who have been supporting the club for generations is less important, and it's more just like getting the highest amount for each ticket. And so it's like football fandom is also transformed in terms of who can actually go to the games. Mm-hmm. And so I'm not sure
here also between, I guess, those very committed football fans who would go to the stadium, they would go with the team away to the away games. Mm-hmm. They would follow everything there is about their team, and maybe those fans which are less involved in the game in that respect. Those who would casually follow maybe the major games, they would follow the European games, they would follow the World Cup, and I think those guys, the second category, they have less afterthoughts about the direction football is going, which is obviously true. It is going into a specific direction that not everybody might like. Mm-hmm. But I think you have to consider whether this group of football purists, if I might call them this way, if it's the majority or if it's a minority compared to those.
That's a good point.
Football casual viewers.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely, there's a limit to how many of those folks are out there, and there is a limit to how much you can monetize those guys and whether you can build a business model around them. Yeah. You're definitely right. I think it sticks in the craw a little bit when the Qataris all of a sudden have huge amounts of money in the or the Emirates have a whole bunch of money that they put into a sports club, and then with any type of acquisition, you always have to pay over the market, right? And it's true in business where there's always a premium on the share price, and it's true in football. Like why would Monaco, who also want to be successful, sell perhaps the next Lionel Messi or the next Cristiano Ronaldo, the next global superstar? You really have to put a lot of money on the table. And so all of a sudden, you have players being bought and sold for 222 million euros. And it's just like, people really ask themselves, is this good for the sport? For me, I don't know. Like a kid who maybe 10, 20 years ago would have played soccer the way that I did because I just loved it and I enjoyed it. And it was a great way to, develop as a person and to spend your time. Or like, I don't know, maybe I could make 10 million or 20 million or 30 million. But then on the other side, like that's also the case in American basketball. There's always going to be huge rewards, and human beings are still human beings. So I don't want to be one of the people who just like, the good old days, back in my day, the footballers came around for a pint or something like that, because I didn't actually start playing until I was 13 or 14. So I can't even be nostalgic for those days. But I wouldn't necessarily buy it that Qatar's image is well served by their investment.
I mean, I think it's certainly helping them being noticed somehow. Sometimes people say you want to be noticed, whether it's good or bad. I mean, I think they get a fair share of criticism for sure. They get also lots of admiration from fans. I mean, PSG fans for sure. Many of them are happy to see the team being competitive, winning, having the great players. I mean,
they're thankful for the benefactors who have come in. And
for sure they are.
Yeah.
And I think even many French football fans, maybe it's less so abroad, for reasons that they feel also probably threatened by having a club coming out and competing with them. I mean, you could see the Bayern Munich president complaining a lot about PSG. The president of the Spanish Liga, who is complaining a lot whether financial fair play is applied, and really making lots of noise about that. I think less so in England, where there's already lots of money in the league. There's Manchester, a city obviously, but yeah, I guess it's a question. There's no right or wrong answer. It's just
I think
the dynamics at play right now in football for sure.
So let's talk about financial fair play. Maybe a lot of people don't know what it actually entails. But from my understanding, and this could be wrong, we can double check this, but over the course of 3 or 4 seasons, your revenues have to match your expenses. Is that roughly how it works?
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay. So for me, like financial fair play doesn't make sense, because a lot of the deals the sponsorship deals, for example, that Manchester City and PSG are doing, like you said it yourself, there's a small maybe not small, but there's a medical clinic or a medical company out of Qatar that is sponsoring the PSG training ground, which it doesn't really make sense. Like if you look at the economics of some of these deals, there's no way that these deals could be profitable for these companies. And so you wonder, like, okay, well, if it's a Qatari company which has the Qatari state as an owner, as an investor, and then all of a sudden they are helping PSG meet the financial fair play by maybe paying over the market for like a training ground sponsorship, I would say it goes beyond violating the spirit of what financial fair play is supposed to be about.
So first of all, to me, financial fair play is still a little bit murky in the aims of the system, in the sense that all emphasis is put on, as you said, balancing expenses and income. A good company would do, but I guess we all know that
it's like a venture-backed startup, is what you're trying to say.
That's a bad example.
It's like the WeWork, like the valuation is more of a notional thing than based on any solid business fundamentals.
Yeah, that's a big different question here. But really, it's about good I guess management practices. But at the same time, we all know that the underlying expectations of financial fair play is to maintain. You might say it's to maintain kind of a level playing field where companies don't overinflate the transfer fees, also the salaries, etc. But also at the same time, what it means is we actually want to maintain the status quo in European football, which to me is a little bit, and it's actually why it's also backed by the Bayern Munich and Barcelona of this world. They also want to maintain the status quo. So I think that's not a very worthy objective to follow from that perspective. Now you might say, okay, we don't want the football to be governed by money. We don't want too much money flowing into football and just increasing the fees, etc. Also because we want the smaller clubs to be able to compete to some extent with the bigger ones. That's fair, but they don't really, in my opinion, they don't really say it this way. So it's not really clear. At the same time, you see this dynamic at play. So, for instance, when PSG was fined 60 million euro in 2014, I believe now, when they purchased also quite a few players, and their income was also lower than it is now. Mm-hmm. And they had also a limitation in the number of players they could register in the Champions League. It was only 21 instead of 23, plus a few other things, a salary cap and stuff like that.
When was this?
A salary cap.
When was the?
That was in
14?
2014, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah. Must have been after Ibrahimovic, Cavani, that type of player came to PSG. Mm-hmm. And of course, they had been also investigated last season and against this season after the Neymar Mbappé deal. Mm-hmm. So, but when they did so, they didn't look at, on one side we have the revenue, on the other side we have the expenses, and they need to balance, because those balance for sure, they even generated
profit,
a surplus, but they actually artificially reduced the value of certain partnership deals PSG had entered into with Qatari-owned institution. I think it was the Qatari Tourism Office or something like that, or authority. So you might say, okay, we want to ensure that there's no foreign influx of capital into clubs because of those objectives. But again, this was not really clear. And the factors on which they decided to decrease the value was not clear. So that doesn't make it very fair, in my opinion. If you say I want to do financial fair play, yes, here are the rules. They're very clear. Those are the scenarios, and then we apply the rules. We're not just creating the law or the case law or whatever as the system is being implemented.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know. I'm of two minds on this, because of course, like in business, you have to invest, and if you have an assumption that if you want to make a bet that the industry is going to grow, then it makes sense to invest and to take losses for a while. Football has become very much a business, and ultimately it's a passion for a lot of people, and to see. Just to see it exploding in this way, where ultimately your team, if they're trying to balance the books or they're trying to be financially responsible somehow, can't keep up and can't compete in the market, then maybe PSG fans are happy, but everybody else okay, well, what's the point anymore? And I think that's dangerous for football, because ultimately the market isn't going to be only Manchester United fans and PSG fans, or Manchester City fans. You're going to have these super clubs, and this power law as it exists in the Bundesliga and the French league is going to expand worldwide. And so I'm not sure that's a good outcome. But I don't know. Let's see how things pan out.
I think for sure inspiration is being taken from US sports. And
in that case, I would argue that there's salary caps, and there's also a draft. And so the teams don't get relegated at the end of the year. They get a chance to get better. And so there's always an element of dynamism. And so I think
that's what I was going into. And some people are arguing that we certainly have powerful clubs in Europe now. I don't know how many there are. Let's say there are 20 of them. Maybe the Champions League teams, to simplify. And some people are calling for some sort of European Super League, a little bit like a closed league, where you could actually implement things such as a draft, salary caps, that type of things. But obviously, that's a big paradigm change for European football, where it was always the expectation that a club starting from the bottom could actually climb the ladder and be in the first league in each country and then play on European stage. And you saw many examples of that throughout history. So that would be a big paradigm change, but it's being actually discussed by people, and I don't know, might have some value in it as well, or maybe on top of the national leagues. I don't know.
Could work.
For sure, it is not a typical club in the sense that it creates lots of even ethical discussions around him. And I think it is certainly necessary for the UEFA in the future to think about rules that maybe provide more clarity into the market, if you want, into the game, but also allow clubs to disrupt the status quo. I think that's arguing that we just want to we don't want certain investment because at the end the expectation is that certain clubs will remain on top. I think that's a weak argumentation, and I think it's not good for football.
Cool. Thanks a lot for joining today, and I hope it was good for you as well.
Yeah, my pleasure. It was great talking to you, Junaid.
It was always a pleasure for me too. Cool. So that wraps up episode 5. And if you have any comments or any questions, then hit us up in the comments below or on Twitter. And look forward to next week. Daniel will be back, and so we'll have episode 6 for you.